chances are, as I wear a silly grin. Victory tonight is mine. After the spring, and spring became the summer.
Look away.
No.
What's pumping?
Danny! Talk to me about rats! No, nobody. There comes a moment in history when a government is so painful to its people, so hurtful to the very soul of its people, that it reaches its moment of destiny. We're dealing with a drug that is worth more than everything else we are developing combined. You make history, I make money. No, we couldn't do that here, not at Mulago.
Why not?
It's the president's hospital. He's bound to find out.
See, courage isn't just about being brave.
If I'm stuck doing everything myself as usual, Edward will come to this filthy, miserable hovel, and I'll just be humiliated. You'd love that, wouldn't you? Don't even try to deny it.
Parenthood brings out the best in people and the worst.
She took so much with her.
I could have been a criminal. I was born in prison. My parents were criminals. Men like us have only two choices: to prey on society or to guard it. You chose the former, I chose the latter.
Now that white people have accustomed themselves to seeing Negro men with guns fighting on their behalf, and now that they can tolerate Negro soldiers getting equal pay, maybe in a few years they can abide the idea of Negro lieutenants and captains.
Those that have gone before us say, no more, no more.
I too thought things could never change. But they did. Losses happen for all of us. But what matters is when you reset the pieces and play again.
The Golden Hind, the first ship to sail all the way around the globe. Imagine what it must be like to see the whole world, to sail the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, and maybe even discover new lands.
What a tremendous honor and pleasure ahead of us here. We are set to talk to the fabulous producer, actor, director, sometimes writer, a man that you've seen in many films, won many awards, and certainly won our hearts through his work and just through his general goodness. Please welcome David Oyelowo.
Thanks, Warren.
Thank you. There's so much to celebrate about you as you're this year's Rogue Award winner at the Ashland Independent Film Festival. That's celebrating somebody mid-career. You might like to think you're in the first third, just extend that career a little bit more.
Semantics.
And I'm, you're one of those actors you can say, like, oh, I've never seen a subpar performance. All of them work. And that's certainly true of you. They're all good performances, but I also note that like you pick exceptionally good roles. You seem to be choosy and crafty about what you do. And I wondered what informed that keen insight into choosing material.
I deem being an actor and being certainly an actor who's been afforded the opportunities I've been afforded an enormous privilege. And I've also had the real genuine experience of seeing how storytelling can and does affect culture. And so therefore, I take it as a big responsibility that having been afforded opportunities that, yes, they're partly to do with my ability as an actor, but, you know, it's a blessing. You know, I went to drama school with some really talented actors, and very few of them are still doing it. It is a notoriously difficult profession to sustain and to continue to be afforded opportunities to basically make a living from. And so my choices are partly governed by the fact that I feel very responsible to make the most of the fact that I'm one of the chosen few. And I say that genuinely because some of it has been right place, right time. Some of them has been to do with doing projects that got seen. That is definitely not a guarantee when you make movies or do a play or do a TV show. And I'm also someone who is thankfully done work that, having been seen, people want to see me again, and that's not what everyone gets. I also have 4 children, and I want to leave behind performances and work that is somehow synonymous with what I'm trying to teach them as a father. And so that really means that I always try to find roles that have some edifying quality to them, have some meaning to them, have something that has maybe generational and cultural impact, because I take being a father incredibly seriously, and I want them to be proud of me. And someone said to me a while ago, you know, the only power you really have as an actor is to say no. And that is I think true. And I'm a man of faith as well. I'm a Christian. I pray about the roles I take. Turns out God has good taste. That's a guiding principle for me as well.
That's a heck of an agent.
You are correct.
I want to talk about that cultural and generational impact in a moment, and how you've got to that with your choices. But I want to go back to something you touched upon there, is this idea that you just were very kind to credit a lot of external factors for being one of the blessed ones who got through drama school and made it through and has the career. But I have to believe there's also something internal for you that has propelled you. It's not just all luck and providence.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, I truly believe in this saying, the difference between good and great is hard work. You will really struggle to outwork me when it comes to being fastidious with the roles I'm afforded, the work I'm afforded. I work very hard. I do know I'm talented. I do know that I have an ability, but I learned very early on that you can't just rely on that. And I've worked with some truly phenomenal actors who have exemplified it. You know, I have worked with Daniel Day-Lewis, my favorite actor of all time. I've worked with Tom Cruise, the actor's actor. I've worked, or the movie star's movie star, I should say. I've worked with, you know, people like Oprah Winfrey, both on and off the screen. She's one of our producers on The Waterman as well. These are people who are icons in the world generally, but to see them up close is to learn anew that they got there through hard work. This was not something that is purely based on talent, purely based on good luck. they will outwork you. And that's how they've managed to sustain these long careers that they have.
Tom Cruise and Daniel Day-Lewis are both hard workers in very different ways from my experience. But I want to touch upon something here because you're working hard, and I've read that particularly on Selma and on Nightingale, you stayed in character for 3 months. You were there, you were locked in as to Peter Snowden or to Martin Luther King. Did you always do that, or did that follow you working with Daniel Day-Lewis on Lincoln, who was notoriously so much in character that he texted Sally Field in character as Lincoln?
Yeah, he was definitely an influence, as was Forrest Whitaker, who I worked with on The Last King of Scotland. Up until working with Forrest, I did Last King of Scotland before I did Lincoln, and up until doing that film, to be honest, the notion of a method actor sort of felt like a pretentious notion to me. It certainly wasn't the nature of the training I had at drama school at the London Academy. It was more of a technical training. Absolutely, you were in contact with the emotional life of the characters you play, but you know, it was more about becoming very in tune with your body, with your mind, with language, with the ability to do accents, dance, fight. You know, you are becoming a very well-rounded performer in terms of being able to go from a prince to a pauper and everything in between. And that was a more theatrical based training. But when I did The Last King of Scotland, and I'll never forget, I was in the hotel in Uganda and I saw Forrest walking towards me. It was the first time I had seen him. And I said, "Oh, hi, Forrest." And he went and just growled at me. And I was so shocked and confused, and then went on to find out that I hadn't said hello to Forrest Whitaker. I had said hello to Idi Amin. And that was just the way it was. I mean, even his wife, I remember saying to me that Forrest called her at one point while shooting, said, "Oh, let's meet halfway between Uganda and LA and meet in New York." And he was saying this to her as Idi Amin, and she said, "I'm gonna wait till you're done with the shoot," and I am with her on that. And look, to be honest, it was tough on everyone else because he's playing a Ugandan dictator. And I also did a film with Forrest called The Butler, where he was playing my father and playing a mild-mannered character. And it was an entirely different experience because he was the butler for the whole time we were doing that. But he was playing this mild-mannered individual. So it wasn't as difficult, but the results are indisputable. As you could say is the same thing with Daniel Day-Lewis in Lincoln. I remember acting opposite him in that film, and I couldn't quite believe what I was seeing. The depth of immersion he had subjected himself to was emanating off him. And of course, Daniel Day-Lewis, his performances and his path to those performances are the things of legend. But it became very apparent to me that in watching Forrest and then in watching Daniel Day-Lewis, it was the work. They had just chosen to sacrifice the normal comforts the rest of us might do in giving a performance of coming in and out of character between takes. And they had just decided to give themselves over to the role wholesale and see what that does. And the results were indisputable. And so with both Nightingale I did before playing Dr. King in Selma. And that was actually such a blessing because I'm the only person in Nightingale. So the thing I feared the most was sort of being deemed a pretentious actor who's sort of sucking all the oxygen and energy from everyone else because you're being Dr. King the whole time. But I got to experiment with it on a character where I was the only person in the film. So I didn't have to sort of come off as some kind of pretentious beep while shooting the film. And what I came to learn about myself as a performer in Nightingale is that the advantage of staying in character the whole time was I never second guessed my choices. I never thought, oh, is my accent okay? Oh, is this what my character would be thinking? Oh, I'm not sure that I was feeling that to the degree I should. It just meant that in exactly the same way as I'm talking to you right now, I'm not having to think about, do I sound David enough at this point? You just get to the point where you just are. And especially when you're playing someone as well known as Dr. King in Atlanta. I mean, we shot it where he was from. I did speeches in front of people who had heard him speak when he was alive. You know, I was in congregations of people in churches who were in their teens and 20s when they heard him speak, and they were now in their 70s and 80s. That's incredibly intimidating. You do not want to be going in and out of this accent to being him while that's going. So it's advantageous on many levels, but the main thing is that there is a magical quality, there's an alchemy, there's a sort of thing that happens when you are locked into that degree. That means you give a performance the likes of which is not what happens when you are going in and out or playing a less difficult character.
Absolutely. I just have to imagine your wife, Jessica, had an easier time living with Dr. King than Forrest Whitaker's wife had with Idi Amin.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised because we were in the middle of doing some decorating at the time, and she called me up, and I will never forget it. She was asking if we should go for the brown curtains or the gray curtains, and without missing a beat, Dr. King wanted the gray curtains, and she was like, "Listen, I can't talk curtains with Dr. We're just going to have to hold on the curtains." So yes, Forrest's wife probably had it a bit harder, but my wife certainly didn't get off lightly.
You talk about playing Dr. King in Selma. It's a glorious performance, and one of the things I've read you talk about is that somehow you were able to let God flow through you to play that role, and that's really fascinating. I know that you're both raised Baptist and had that in common. Does that feel like a valve you can sort of turn on or off and let God flow through you for a particular character?
Oh gosh, it's a really difficult thing to articulate. That role, I first read the script in 2007. And I remember reading it, and again, for people who don't have this relationship with God, this may sound odd, but for me, I heard God tell me I was going to play that role. And the reason I knew it was God telling me I was going to play that role is because I thought that was a ridiculous notion. I had never played an American or barely played an American. We were only 2 months off the boat, so to speak, having moved to LA in 2007. I certainly had not done any work that would even remotely put me in the hemisphere of playing a character of this magnitude and nature. And I heard it as clear as day, and it did not come from me. And little did I know that it would take another 7 years before we would make it. But in those 7 years, my faith about the fact that I would get to play it had grown so exponentially that by the time I found myself on that set, there was there were some really challenging moments along the way. There were 2 times where the film looked like it was gonna go. I'd put on a bunch of weight and then the film would fall apart. There were 5 directors in the intervening time of those 7 years before it became Ava DuVernay. And so by the time we were actually shooting, I was sort of in a state of blissful surrender to the fact that this is something I was called to do. I had put in the work. And as you say, I found myself as a bit of more of an open channel than I had experienced before for stuff to come through me and out of me that even now I watch that film and it's a very odd experience because I can no longer chart the connection between me, David, and that character I played that sort of looks like a sort of flabbier version of me. So something magical happened. Like I say, it's hard to articulate, which is why I'm not doing the best job of it right now. But I know that I was a conduit for something that transcends pure storytelling.
And that performance does. I want to touch upon this idea of magic, because magic comes in many different forms. Part of it is, you mentioned that there are 5 directors before settling on Ava. You had worked with her before and have done multiple projects. Do you feel like there's a certain magic in the collaboration that you two have, whether it's Middle of Nowhere or Selma or even A Piece for Jay-Z?
Absolutely. I consider her my creative soulmate in a way. And, talking about magic, the path for me to Ava and then our mutual path to Selma was magical. I mean, I sat next to a guy on a plane as I was about to go and do reshoots for a film called Rise of the Planet of the Apes. He was watching a show I used to do in the UK called MI5 on his iPad. He paused his iPad, looked at me, asked me if this was me he was watching on his iPad. I said, "Oh, yes, that is me," which led to a conversation with him asking me, is investing in movies a good idea? Because he'd just been asked to put $50,000 into a film called Middle of Nowhere. I said, well, send me the script and I'll tell you if I think it's a good one. And I read it, and not only did I think it was a good one and told him to invest, I called the number on the front of the script, and it happened to be Ava DuVernay, who had written it and who was looking to put this small $200,000 film together. And that's how our relationship began. Lee Daniels was the one who actually cast me in Selma originally. We were at a time in cultural and cinematic and American history where there was still no level of priority given to a story of that nature, even though Dr. King is the only African-American, only American to have a holiday named after him in the 20th century. We had a J. Edgar Hoover movie before we had a Dr. King movie, something to remember. I think we even had a movie about the guy who invented the window screen wipers that Michael Keane played before we had a Dr. King movie. And so, the fact that Ava had come into my life, I felt I had been in the presence of a genius, and was then able to fight for her to be the one to direct Selma, having been rejected by the original director I auditioned for in 2007, by the way, to then go all the way 7 years later to help pick the director, and then for the result to be a film that has gone on to have a resonance in the wake of Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, the continuing racial fight that both in America and around the world, the film has sort of become something that we couldn't have imagined. And so, yeah, that was clearly sort of a magical set of circumstances.
There's so much to discuss with you, and race and politics, I imagine, will come up in this conversation. But I want to go back to Ava for a second in this sense, and maybe I'm making the wrong connection, but you have been such a champion of female filmmakers. And I wondered if she sort of cemented that goal, or you had always thought, this is something I want to do. I want to champion female filmmakers and screenwriters. That's a goal.
Yeah, I think she was the sort of crowning, or is the crowning moment of that fight, which has been a long fight for me. But no, I before working with Ava, that was a big priority of mine. Films that I've produced, whether it was 5 Nights in Maine that Maris Curran directed, or more recently Come Away with Brenda Chapman. I was such a privilege for me to work with Mira Naya on Queen of Cartway. Cynthia Mort was someone I worked with, and I produced a film called Nina that she directed about Nina Simone. And Amma Asante was someone who I also produced and handpicked, produced the film and handpicked to do a film that we did together called A United Kingdom. And you know, Ava is part of that line of filmmakers I've been privileged enough to work with in some capacity and be able to champion. And if I'm honest, it's for selfish reasons. I have found working with female directors to be hugely beneficial to me as an actor, because they are 50% of humanity, and they bring something to movies that, you know, it's not that men don't or can't, it's just something we see less of. And it therefore makes the films have a sort of special quality. I'm hoping that we are going to come to a point where the female perspective is so much more normalized that it doesn't have that special quality. But if you watch A United Kingdom, and certainly I experienced the evolution of Selma as a script, as it went from 4 male directors, well, I should say 2 white male directors to 2 black male directors to a black female director. And it was incredible to watch the migration of the tone, the perspective, and the priorities displayed in those scripts as each one of those directors put their hands on the script because of what their biases are, what their focuses are, what their perspective is. I mean, before Ava did her pass on Selma, my interaction with Coretta Scott King, as played by Carmen Ejogo, was 3 phone calls. We were never in a room together. There was no role worthy of Lorraine Toussaint or Oprah Winfrey or Tessa Thompson, let alone Carmen Ejogo, who's playing Coretta Scott King. That was Ava and her bias as a female, black female director who knew that it was impossible to achieve what the civil rights movement did without women in prominent roles there. And earlier in the incarnation of Selma, the lead, the protagonist of Selma, was Lyndon Johnson. It was a white man. And why? Because there were 2 white male directors who were at the helm, and that was their bias, that was their perspective and priority. And it's not to say that any of those people made the wrong choice necessarily, but if we don't have different kinds of people telling stories, then we are always going to be skewing in one direction. And as I said earlier in this conversation, film has such far-reaching cultural impact. You know, those films that I grew up loving, that are the inspiration for The Waterman or me directing The Waterman, I was never reflected in those films. You know, as much as I loved E.T. and Stand By Me and Goonies and Gremlins, you know, a kid who looked like me back then was never front and center of those narratives. And I know the power that The Waterman, potentially anyway, can have because of my perspective, my priorities, and my biases, which is why we need lots of different kinds of people telling these stories.
Well, you have done an amazing job with making those opportunities through your company, your Rubus Axton Productions, which clearly represents your roots within the name. And love that. I'm curious, that company, do you see it as a way to ensure that you have good roles to play? Do you see it as this platform to let others tell the stories they need to? Or is it part of this almost mission, I think you've called it, to get stories of faith and goodness out into the world?
It's all of it, Warren. It's all of it. It started more from a place of necessity because, like I say, the roles I aspire to play, and thank you for noticing that they are very judiciously picked. And so earlier on in my career, I had to say no a lot because the things that were coming in felt caricature, stereotypical, or just not very well realized. And I didn't want that to be part of the legacy of my career. And so, look, you don't get everything right, even if you're curating and creating those roles for yourself. You know, it's a very difficult thing to get a film right. But every film we've made at Yoruba Saxon, the intention behind it is fairly pure in terms of what we're trying to say, who it's for, who's behind the camera, who's in front of the camera. And so initially, Yoruba Saxon was a bit more of a vehicle for me and what I wanted to say and the kind of roles and stories I wanted to be a part of. But as it has continued to evolve, it is those things you say. It is about creating a platform for marginalized voices. It is about entertaining audiences through the eyes of people who maybe are not their eyes or they haven't seen the perspective of those people. It's called Yoruba Saxon because I'm from the Yoruba tribe in Nigeria. My wife is Anglo-Saxon and she's English. And you know, I truly believe we are able to achieve greater things together than when we are apart. It's not about just Black voices or just white voices or just female voices or just, you know, it's about a myriad of voices celebrating and enjoying and displaying the plethora of the human experience. And that's really the focus of the company.
And again, it comes out through the work. Like you can't deny it if you look at all the films that you have had a hand in and not see that connection between them. You know, I was curious in The Waterman, which is kicking off the Ashland Independent Film Festival. It's clearly a movie that has a line of faith running through it. And I've read you talk about the idea that you don't think there are enough movies about faith because you don't think there are enough people in positions of power who are people of faith themselves to greenlight those projects. But given how much Christianity is fairly dominant in this country, it still seems astonishing to me that we talk about it as little as we do.
Yeah, well, look, there is a niche part of I guess, entertainment and the film industry that is very proselytory. I guess you'd call them faith-based films. But I'm not personally as engaged with or interested in making films that are proselytory or feel preachy or are preaching to the choir in some way. You know, my faith manifests in a very real world sense. You know, the Bible is an R-rated book. It is an intense book. It is not sort of cookie cutter, sugar coated, goody two shoes, cupcakes and fairies. That's just not the God I worship. That's not the Bible I read. And that's not the life I've lived. It is gnarly and edgy and jagged, and it is a terrain not for the light of heart to be a person of faith. So, you know, I think that my industry, the film industry, is quite rightly weary of preachiness, weary of low production value being excused because it's a quote unquote good message. You know, for me, God is so excellent. I mean, you only have to go to the bottom of the ocean and see some of the magnificent creatures that most of us will never get to see and how amazing they are, to see that if you are a person of faith, if you are truly connected to God, the work you do should be better than anyone else's. It should be transcendent and it should not deny the jagged edges. You know, for me, the light shines brightest in the darkness. I'm not going to shy away from dark themes and the dark edges, but I'm certainly not going to prioritize or proselytize about or even glamorize darkness. You know, that I do not think is what I'm here to do. And I don't agree with filmmakers who say it doesn't matter what they put out. It doesn't have an effect on culture and young people and attitudes. That is simply not true. So, you know, a film we made that I guess is the closest thing you could define as a faith-based movie is a film called Captive. But it was about, you know, a meth addict and a murderer who are holed up together for 7 hours, and they somehow find a connection over a book called The Purpose-Driven Life, written by Rick Warren. And, you know, this meth addict managed to talk down this murderer to give himself up, and she never touches meth again. That's the God I know and serve. Is he takes broken people and puts them back together, and they are not necessarily pretty in the aftermath, but they are functional in the aftermath. And you get through life, you know, holding on for dear life to a God who saved you. That's my experience. And I think those make for pretty great stories.
They are great stories. I aspire to functional, so thank you for.
You'll get there, Warren. I promise you'll get there.
I'll hang in there. I will say, and I mean this sincerely, that you don't seem broken. You seem whole. And one of the things that really moves me is that the relationship with your wife, Jessica, seems just splendid from the outside. You've been married, is it a quarter century now? Is that correct?
22 years.
22 years. And you have 4 kids, and you seem happier and better than ever. Is there a secret to that?
Thank you for saying that.
School.
and what?
And you met in acting school. And it worked.
Yeah. We actually met before acting. We met as teenagers doing youth theater. We met as we were 17 and 18. We met doing a youth production of the Three Penny Opera. And yeah, I don't throw that word around in a sort of superficial way. I'm a very, very blessed man. You know, I became a Christian when I was 16. Yes, I was brought up in the Baptist church, but I found it interminably boring. And I only went because my parents did. And I naively struck a deal with God and said, look, if you are real, I need you to turn up for me within 3 months or I'm out. And he did. And that happened when I was 16. And I met Jess 2 years later, and we were friends for a while, and then we fell in love. And, you know, I genuinely met my soulmate. And the wonderful thing with us is that we got married at 20 and 22. And we had nothing. So everything we have, we built together. And so I think as a result, we sidestepped some of the real challenges you face as a married couple in the film industry, because, you know, there were no ulterior motives to being married to each other. Like I say, everything we had, we built with each other. We had things built into our marriage, like a 2-week rule. We're never apart for more than 2 weeks, which is why, despite me being here in Somerset, England, about to start a new job, I'm quarantining right now before I start. Jess is in the other room here with 2 of our 4 kids. And, you know, that's to do with the fact that we just simply refuse to be apart, which is, you know, has been a great thing for our marriage. And, you know, the more you're around someone, and if you really like them, which through this pandemic, I've realized I really like my wife, because, you know, nothing will test your relationship more than being with each other all day, every day for 12 months with no break. And yeah, you know, we just, I found my soulmate. You know, not everyone does in this life, and that's why I'm genuinely happy. But I think also with my faith, I didn't expect to talk about my faith as much in this interview, but I guess that's how it's happened. It's really helpful in my incredibly superficial, self-obsessed inducing profession to worship a God that makes you take your eyes off yourself, have children that help you take your eye off yourself, have a wife who will tell you when your eyes are too much on yourself. You know, those are all very healthy things to have in your life, in what I do.
There are so many other things I'd like to talk about. I'd like to talk about Prometheus Bound and your work on spooks and all sorts of things. But you mentioned something significant there about this eyes on you thing. And I was going to say, one of the other qualities that really stands out for me in your work is, unlike some movie stars where you can see they're just itching to get themselves out there on camera somehow, there's a tremendous graceful humility to all of your work. And I just wondered, have you always been that grounded? And it seems to me, it reads as a self-assurance, a healthy self-assurance.
Gosh, I'm glad you think so. You know, trust me, I have a very healthy ego, and vanity is not something I am not guilty of. It goes back to what I said earlier. I'm just very aware that everything I have by way of a career and in my life is not something I've necessarily earned. It's been a blessing, and it could easily have not been this way, and it is, and so I never want to take it for granted. My faith is definitely a part of that as well, but I like to think I was raised well by my parents. But also, look, pride comes before a fall. You will not remain someone who audiences want to see for your entire career. Every actor I know, every great artist has their ups and downs. And when you are on your way down, you better have been nice on your way up, because people will remind you of it. And quite rightly, your way back from it may be a lot harder if you haven't been nice along the way. Which is also partly why I just love telling stories, not just as an actor, but as a producer, as a writer, and as a director. I just love telling stories. I don't take it for granted that I always get to be in front of the camera. So, you know, me directing is just a way of trying to stretch this thing out. Maybe they'll let me behind the camera if they'll no longer allow me in front of it. So, you know, I'm just very, very aware of the fact that no one is owed anything. And so, you know, take everything you're given with grace and gratefulness.
Well, I can't thank you enough, both for your humility and your tremendous talent. Even if you won't fully recognize it, we certainly do, and hope to see you on screens forever and ever. I know that if I have some takeaways, it's that God is a great manager for you. We also know that you have the good grace not to name the foolish director who rejected you for a documentary.
Yes, they will remain nameless.
And you will continue to act and direct and produce, and in so doing, provide a platform for many storytellers of many different types, really creating a cultural and generational impact that will last lifetimes. Thank you so much, David Oyelowo. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren. I really appreciate it. This has been fun. Thank you.